Good afternoon once again. My name is Alex Johnson, and I'm proud to serve the Community College of Allegheny County as its president, and I'd like to welcome you to the Allegheny campus. We have four very distinguished individuals who head our campuses. One has actually made herself into two people because she serves as the interim president of one of our campuses as well. And her name is Dr. Donna Emhoff, and this is the campus where she leads. And I'd like to take this moment just to recognize Donna and to thank her publicly for helping us with this event today. We are always pleased when we get individuals who are very supportive of CCAC to come to our locations to be part of what we're all about with respect to educational development. We feel very, very strongly about our mission. We feel strongly that we do a good job in that regard. In return, we produce absolutely wonderful individuals to carry on the wonderful traditions of our community. This afternoon, we do have among our distinguished guests today, and I'm talking about you, individuals that I'd like to recognize directly. First of all, we have Barbara Daly Danko, who is one of our county council representatives. Barbara, thank you so much. Mr. Bob Macy, another county council member, and very, very staunch supporter of both very, very staunch supporters of CCAC, particularly our veterans programs and our aviation programs. We also have Representative Bill Courts. Thank you, Representative Courts, for being here today. Joining us also are Mr. Steve Bland. Many of you know Steve because he heads up our Port Authority, responsible for transportation, and this would be certainly a meeting that he would want to attend. Where's Bill? I saw him. Steve, I'm sorry, Bill. Steve. Where are you, Steve? Okay. We are so pleased this afternoon to have Secretary of Transportation, Deputy Secretary of Transportation, Mr. John Porcari, visit us today. Before coming to this venue, he spent an hour with our students, talking with them about the importance of transportation and describing the federal role in that regard. We are appreciative, too, that our county exec, another staunch supporter of CCAC, has joined us today, and he will be providing remarks around transportation based on his experiences, and Mr. Dennis Yablonsky will join this duo as well. As you know, Dennis is the CEO of the Allegheny Conference on Workforce Development. He has served in various capacities, but he's also served on the Governor's Special Advisory Committee on Transportation. This is an important topic for a lot of reasons. Pittsburgh is a city of bridges, and it's important that individuals are able to maneuver those bridges in ultimately Allegheny County. We also have a growing population in need of transportation, and I think our conversation today will be instructive as we move forward. One example of how our students have benefited from our transportation system is the North Shore Connector, and if you have not had an opportunity to ride the North Shore Connector from downtown, I would ask you to do that. First of all, it's an extraordinary ride, and secondly, it's free, at least for the time being. The Penguins, and I'm sorry, not the Penguins, I'm giving credit where credit may not be due at this particular point in time, but the Pittsburgh Steelers and the casino have joined forces to make sure that at least over the next 2.5 years, that individuals coming to the North Side North Shore will be able to ride the connector free. CCAC has hosted the Labor Management Institute Speaker Series over the past 2 years, and without going into a lot of detail about it, it has been one of our most successful endeavors to bring our external stakeholders to our community. With that, let me ask our board chair-elect, Ms. Amy Kuntz, a senior VP from PNC, to come up and provide additional welcoming remarks. Thank you so very much for your time.
Good afternoon and welcome, everyone. On behalf of the Board of Trustees of CCAC, as well as the Board of our Educational Foundation, I'd like to welcome Deputy Secretary Porcari, Allegheny County Executive Rich Fitzgerald, and Dennis Yablonsky as well. With such a distinguished panel, I'm looking forward to an informative and spirited discussion this afternoon, and I suspect that's why all of you are here as well. We are blessed to have so many people in our community who care deeply about CCAC as well as the economic vitality of our region. And it's that spirit of collaboration that allows us to bring today's program to you. Bob Mill is the embodiment of that spirit, the man whose passion for both CCAC and the power of labor management collaboration brings us together today. So I thank all of you for joining us, and I thank Bob for being the reason that we're together here today. And I'd like to thank our distinguished panel for gracing us with their presence, their insights, and their perspectives. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Charlie Bloxage. I'm not Bob Mill, and that's what a lot of people say. Yeah, too, Leo. Thank you. This lecture series honors Bob Mill, and Bob has been a longtime champion of the college and an ardent supporter of positive labor management relations, often referred to as Mr. CCAC. Bob was a member of our first graduating class here at the college. He served as president of the Board of Trustees for 25 years, chairman of the Board of Trustees for a decade, and also as a member of our Education Foundation. Bob unfortunately can't be with us today, but he has provided us with a video, and I'll ask our technicians to play it at this time.
Good afternoon, and welcome to the fourth edition of the Robert M. Mill Lecture Series. As you can see, I cannot be with you this afternoon, but wanted to personally welcome you to CCAC and give you some terrific news. First of all, I want to thank the speakers who have graciously accepted our invitation to be here. I am honored by your presence. Today's theme was thoughtfully created by members of our advisory committee to provoke conversation. This is the call to action. We need to depart from the status quo, one crisis to the next, and strive for an effective, comprehensive regional transportation strategy. This lecture series and the endowed chair in my name has become CCAC's opportunity to provoke conversation and get important regional issues to the forefront. Today is no exception. We welcome your questions and suggestions. An endeavor like this takes time, effort, and lots of money. I set out to raise the necessary capital to endow the chair and to breathe life into what has become known as the CCAC Labor and Management Institute. The curriculum is being created for the certificate program by a collaborative of the college faculty, regional labor leaders, and their management counterparts to make it a robust challenge for our future students, whom I'm proud to say will begin taking classes in the fall of 2013. Many thanks to Charlie Bloxage, Mary Frances Archie, and Jackie Cavalier from CCAC, Jim Kunz representing labor, and Bob Howard representing management, and of course Charlie McCollister, our consultant, for their tireless work on the curriculum. I told you that this endeavor was going to take lots of money. Our goal of $1 million is and was a daunting task. I am pleased to report that we have reached and exceeded our goal. To date, we have raised $1.2 million, thanks in large part to lead pledges from Highmark and Peoples Gas. We also received very generous support from the carpenters, the operating engineers, and the USW. The fundraising task was accomplished in just over a year, and I am thankful to all who have committed to my dream of this institute here at my alma mater. Thanks for being here to celebrate this region's unique brand of labor and management cooperation. Have a great day.
I just have a few housekeeping details. One of them is that you received a folder when you came into the auditorium today. Contained therein is a brochure describing the lecture series, an agenda for today's program, an evaluation form, which we would appreciate that you complete at the conclusion of the program, and some index cards, which can be used to write down some questions, which at the end of the program, you'll be able to submit those. They'll be collected, and our moderator, Bill Flanagan, will then ask the participants to respond. This series is in its third year, and it's guided by our advisory board, and those names are also listed on your program. But those members of the advisory board, I wish they could stand now so that they could be acknowledged. Would you please rise? Now, the highlight of my responsibilities today is to bring up our chair of the advisory board and also the Labor Management Institute itself, and that is Leo Gerard. And Leo, of course, is a dear friend of the college, an ardent supporter of the college. He serves as the international president of the United Steelworkers. He's a former keynote speaker of the series, and he will introduce our presenters today. Leo.
Thanks, Charlie. I really want to pay compliment before I introduce the speakers to Bob Mill. I can remember one day where Bob and I were, I'm not sure if you'd call it having an argument, but we were having a discussion about stuff. And I have lots of reasons to have discussions and argue with Bob about stuff because Bob worked for Highmark and we get our health care from Highmark, and I always figured they charged me too much. No matter if they gave it away, I'd still be after them. And I remember saying to him that Allegheny County is missing a really important message. And that message is that we've been painted with a bad brush about labor management relations. And if you look at what we've done in this area in the last 20 years, the kind of economic renewal that's gone on, the kind of work that we've done building stadiums, fixing bridges, doing all of that stuff, doing it with union labor, doing it with domestically created material, and doing it on time and under budget usually. And it's about time we started exposing and talking about the positive labor management relations we have in the county. Not long after that, and he may have had it in his pocket a long time before that, but Bob started talking about creating a labor management forum. And that we were able to reach the objective of more than $1 million. Doesn't mean we should quit raising, because I think that it's a terrific contribution to have at this college an ongoing labor management forum. I think I asked Bill Flanagan, I think this is our fourth one. And we've had some high-profile folks. We had the Secretary of Labor. We've had the President of the AFL-CIO and the head of Consul Energy here and doing those kinds of discussions. And today I think we're going to be treated to a terrific discussion about developing a strategy to move to a comprehensive regional transportation plan. And we've had the ups and downs on a regular basis of what do we do about transportation, what do we do about transportation infrastructure. And I think we have three eminently qualified people here today to talk to us about it. I want to take the opportunity to introduce them on a very personal note. And the first person I want to introduce I'll do after I've asked all three of them to come up and grab a chair. And John Porcari, if you can sit on the outside edge, you'll be first speaker. So if you guys, John and Dennis and Rich, if you would come up. I wanted to get the sense of power of telling the Deputy Secretary of Transportation to come up and sit down, and the county executive, Dennis Yablonsky. Man, this is really a powerful position I got. But I want to take the opportunity to introduce them in a more formal way. But let me say, apart from the formal comments I want to make about John Porcari, that he's a terrific friend to building infrastructure, not just transportation infrastructure, but all infrastructure. Although he's Deputy Secretary of DOT, John has taken a very strong position at DOT that I think is a symbol to other secretaries and other government departments. And that is, if there's taxpayer dollars that are going to be spent on infrastructure, whether it's transportation infrastructure, then it needs to first have a complete analysis of domestic content. And with John's leadership, the Department of Transportation has done more to create American jobs in the manufacturing sector because of the position he and Secretary LaHood have taken with the President's blessing of making sure that those taxpayer dollars are focused on getting products and material that are made in America. And for that, before I do formal introduction, I want to thank you, John. Thank you much. John has served as the 19th United States Deputy Secretary of Transportation since 2009. Before that, John served as, and by the way, that makes him the Chief Operating Officer of the Department of Transportation. Before that, he worked in the state of Maryland, and he was the Secretary of the Maryland Department of Transportation since 2007. At DOT, he oversees a staff of 55,000. He has been a graduate of the University of Maryland at College Park. He previously served as Deputy Secretary of Transportation for Maryland and as the Assistant Secretary of Economic Development Policy in Maryland Department of Business and Economics. Prior to his positions in the state government, he served as Vice President of a civil engineering and land use consulting firm at the local government level. And as I say, John is a true friend of those of us that want to make things in America. Dennis Yablonsky. We all know Dennis as the Chief Executive Officer of the Allegheny Conference. Dennis became the CEO of the Allegheny Conference on Community Development and its affiliates at the Greater Chamber of Commerce, Pennsylvania Economic Lead of Southwestern Pennsylvania, and the Pennsylvania Regional Alliance in March of 2009. While he was serving as Secretary of Department of Community and Economic Development at DCED from 2003 to 2008, one of the things that Dennis is responsible for is a $3 billion, it's quite amazing, a $3 billion economic stimulus to support clinical infrastructure in core communities and job-producing businesses while he was in that job in Pennsylvania. He also helped create the government's $650 million energy fund and reducing dependence on foreign oil and growing Pennsylvania energy economy. And he played, I know from his time at state government, a terrific role in developing economic development and stimulus and manufacturing, and took many of the kinds of positions along with Governor Rendell that those dollars should be spent in Pennsylvania and in America. And that's, again, Rich Fitzgerald. Rich is, as we all know, the county executive. As the county executive, Rich is responsible for overseeing the county. But Rich is grew up in the Pittsburgh Bloomfield area. He's a graduate of Central Catholic High School, Bachelor of Science in Mechanical Engineering with a business minor from Carnegie Mellon University. Rich is one of the folks that fought for the reorganization of regional government and was instrumental in leading that charge. And while he was on the regional government, he was also president of county council for most of that time. And I can say that from my relationship with Rich Fitzgerald, we're lucky to have a county executive who puts jobs in the county at the top of the list and isn't concerned about missing any opportunity, doesn't have to be concerned about missing any opportunity to be at the forefront of talking about creating jobs in Allegheny County and to be a loud voice for economic development and a loud voice for a positive labor management environment that we have in Allegheny County. These three gentlemen, I think, are each leaders in their own right. We're lucky to have them here today. We're lucky to be able to share in their insight and their commitment. And in that regard, I'd like to ask John Porcari to come up and give us his remarks. John will be the keynote speaker, and then Dennis and Rich will comment on that. And my understanding is Bill Flanagan will then lead a question and answer period. I want to apologize to them for leaving. Normally I'd want to stay and listen to it, but I told them each that I'm actually chairing our International Union Executive Board, and I gave up the gavel, and I hope to get back and not find all my desk and shit out in the street. So thank you all very much. John Porcari.
You know, one of the things you never want to do is follow Leo Gerard. Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here, and thanks, Leo, and everyone in CCAC for inviting me. It's great to be here in Pittsburgh. Let me get this out of the way. Great victory last night.
Yeah.
You earned it. We're here in the birthplace of the Steeler Nation in the modern-day labor movement, and it's a place where hard work never went out of style. Pittsburgh's also home to vibrant neighborhoods, a world-class transit system, and I got to see some of that this morning, countless bridges and tunnels. It's the epitome of what makes a city a great place to live and work. And you've worked together a lot over the last few decades to build that quality of life. I'm here today to talk about the challenges of building a 21st century transportation infrastructure and how that impacts the region's economic development and what we need to do together to ready our workforce to meet these challenges. You know, we're a nation of dreamers and builders. Americans invented the airplane, we built the Transcontinental Railroad, we dreamed up the interstate highway system. Today, the American dream to dream big dreams and build big things is alive and well. Just look at the plans that President Obama has to connect 80% of Americans over the next 20 years with high-speed rail. Or the efforts underway to build NextGen, the next generation air traffic control system that'll revolutionize air travel. As President Obama has said, the only way to make an economy built to last is by out-innovating, out-building, and out-educating the rest of the world. The President established his Jobs Council so that the administration could hear from America's job creators about how we can put people back to work, how we can spur economic development, and restore America's long-term economic competitiveness. What we have heard over and over is that infrastructure investment is integral to improving the health of our economy. Transportation is economic development if it's done right. When we invest in a 21st century transportation system, we create jobs today and we support American businesses over the long run. The fact is, transportation isn't just a convenient way of rebuilding our economy. It's a necessity for a new economy. If we don't invest in transportation projects, commuters and entrepreneurs will find America's arteries of commerce clogged. In Pittsburgh, public transportation has played such a key role in revitalizing and strengthening the North Shore, including right here at one of the largest community colleges in the country. The North Shore Light Rail Connector, which has been running for about 8 months now, is clearly helping Pittsburgh to become an even more livable city, and one that creates jobs in the process. It means that thousands of CCAC students can keep a lot more gas money in their pockets by taking light rail to get to their internships at companies like Del Monte and StarKist, or taking a Steelers game at Heinz Field or a Pirates game at PNC Park. It means thousands of commuters can get to work in Pittsburgh's Golden Triangle without sitting in traffic. And transit is a magnet for new business and economic development, which in turn creates more good local jobs. We see that around the country, and we see that here in Pittsburgh today with new hotels, office buildings, and other building projects underway in this rapidly developing area. All across Pittsburgh, the T, express busways, and a battalion of regular bus routes improve access to jobs, healthcare, education, and other vital services to tens of thousands of residents on a daily basis. Pittsburgh also benefits from improved highway connections made possible by projects that will provide better connections linking communities to the downtown, major business centers, and the airport. This region also benefits from investment in numerous bridge projects that preserve and rebuild existing spans, linking our communities, separated by the glorious Three Rivers. The Department of Transportation is proud to be Pittsburgh's partner as you continue to invest in good transportation choices that improve the quality of life for your communities, put people back to work, and help to create a greener, more sustainable city for generations to come. Pittsburgh had the long-held reputation for being known as Steel City. While Pittsburgh has a more diversified economy today than it did 30 years ago, we can all agree that manufacturing built our country, manufacturing created the middle class, and manufacturing is the foundation of our future economic prosperity. If we want to remain the world's greatest country, we have to continue to be a nation that builds things. President Obama knows this. I know it, and you know it. Transportation investments have played a critical role in reviving our manufacturing sector, and they will continue to be a pillar of our efforts at the Department of Transportation. This summer, President Obama signed into law a transportation bill moving ahead for progress in the 21st century, better known as MAP 21. This law will create good-paying jobs and put Americans back to work repairing our nation's infrastructure. It invests $81 billion in our highways and $21 billion in our nation's transit systems. It also furthers our commitment to building transportation projects with American hands and American-made parts and supplies by strengthening our Buy America requirements for roads, bridges, and transit projects. Our roads, runways, and railways are going to be American-built. All of these efforts help us to develop a 21st century transportation system that creates jobs and boosts our competitiveness. But in order to rebuild America, we need a skilled workforce. Right now, we know that half of America's transportation workers will soon be eligible to retire in the next decade. We need thousands of young workers to replace aging baby boomers, not to mention a whole new generation of highly trained specialists to design and build infrastructure that's greener, more efficient, and large enough to meet the demands of population growth. You know, America in 2050 is going to have 100 million more people. 2050 is like the day after tomorrow if you're building a big transportation project. Let me give you some perspective on what 100 million more Americans means. It means another California and Texas and Florida and New York. And think about our transportation system today. Add 100 million people, and you start to see the challenge that we have for the future. We have to act now to inspire and train future engineers and planners, as well as the people moving the earth and laying the track. These are good-paying, family-supporting jobs. We need community colleges like CCAC to build bridges between our training programs centered around these skills and transportation employers. Jobs in science, technology, engineering, and math are in high demand and will need skilled candidates to fill this pipeline. At CCAC, students can choose from a variety of transportation-related programs to prepare for the competitive job market. CCAC job seekers can learn automotive technology, engineering, heavy equipment operations, and others. A student can even learn to be a pilot of a single-engine airplane at CCAC. At the Department of Transportation, we're proud of the programs we're making through our mentoring programs to encourage an interest in transportation. For example, we provided over $72 million in grants to our nation's leading academic institutions through our University Transportation Centers program. These competitive grants help support state-of-the-art transportation research at colleges and universities throughout the country. We need to help individuals recognize that working in transportation can be a great career, not just a job, but a great career. And we also need to help veterans transition from their active duty military experience into civilian careers. Together, DOT and the Department of Veterans Affairs have launched a website to help veterans find jobs in the private sector and learn what training and certification they need. CCAC does impressive work with its own Veterans Services Center, giving support to student veterans in their transition to civilian life. If you think about it, giving support to our veterans is the least we can do. Today, we have choices to make. We have to decide whether to invest in our future or continue relying on the infrastructure of yesterday. We owe it to our kids and grandkids to build a strong economy and a skilled workforce that's prepared to win. If you look here in the Pittsburgh metro area or any other place in the country, take a look at the infrastructure, bridges, airports, roads, transit systems. And if you take a close look at them and you're honest with yourself, you'll see that they were designed and built and paid for by our parents and grandparents. And then ask yourself the next question. Are we paying it forward? Are we doing right by the next generation? And again, if you're honest with yourself, I think you know the answer is no. We need to do more. That's why the President, that's why Secretary LaHood, that's why the whole DOT team is committed to using transportation as a foundational investment in economic development for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I was waiting for Flanagan to come up and give us the cue. No, I think the Secretary was spot on some of the things we need to do. And I know as county executive, I spend an awful lot of time going around and visiting companies on a daily basis, really, all throughout this region. You know, basically asking them, what do you want? What can we do for you to help you grow, help you expand, help you, make our economy grow? And there's really two things that they talk about all the time. And one of them is not they ask for lower taxes. They really don't. I mean, that's something you hear maybe on talk shows or maybe on the radio, but I never get that request as county executive. They ask for two things. They ask for access to their work site. They ask for transportation, whether it be transit or whether it be the road structure to get them there. And we have obviously some challenges in this region because of our growing economy, which is a good thing, but overcrowded Parkway, particularly the Parkway West, has become the most crowded crowded road in the nation, and a burgeoning transit system that's starting to grow and starting to come back. And the second thing they ask us for is help to find trained workers. We have jobs. We're going to need 50 jobs over the next year. We're going to need 100 jobs over the next 3 years. But we don't have the skills. We have the people, but we don't have the skill set. So there's this gap. There's this skill set gap that is out there. Now, we're doing better than most. I mean, we get good news all the time. The Brookings Institution study that just came out a couple of days ago talked about our metropolitan region being one of only 3 regions in the nation that have come back from the Great Recession. Us, Dallas, and Nashville, Tennessee. And they measure it, there's a calculation per capita, GDP per capita, and unemployment. We're doing better than most, and we're doing better than most for lots of reasons, probably because we do invest in education. Our workforce has become more educated than it was 30 years ago when we started to go through, some of the bad things that we went through and people were moving away. And the other thing that we do, I think we do better than anybody, is we cooperate. We come together. We come together with business and labor. This symposium is emblematic of that. The first one was Leo Gerard and John Surma, the head of U.S. Steel and the head of the United Steelworkers. I see Jack Shea sitting here and some of other labor leaders here. Business and labor sit down together and work to a common solution because we're all in it together. When Dennis Yablonsky, the head of the business community, sits down with the head of the labor community, we sit down with our universities and our institutions and our developers and our foundation community and government at all levels. And Mr. Secretary, I want to say this publicly. What you guys have done, your boss, Ray LaHood, Secretary Solis, they've been here many, many times over the past 4 years during your administration. And part of the reason we've been able to grow so much is because of the support that you have given us. It's no small feat. Make sure you tell your boss, we delivered by 91,000 votes Allegheny County in the last a month ago. So Shay knows that because he was out there working pretty hard. So it was good for both of us. You've been really benefiting and investing in us as a community, and I think we've led the nation. We've been in the top 2 or 3 throughout the last 4 years in job growth. We want to continue that, and we're looking forward to working with you on that. My turn. Your turn. I'll try not to repeat what's already been said, but at the risk of stating a couple of obvious things, I think the timing on this discussion is really pertinent, both at the regional, state, and the federal level for a number of different reasons. The region, the greater Pittsburgh region, as you've heard, is doing very well right now, relatively speaking, relative to national and benchmark averages. Jobs are good, unemployment rate's low, investment is coming along, real estate looks good. It's a good time for us right now. But in my opinion, one of the three key things that could upend us is a lack of investment in an integrated transportation infrastructure. We heard that from our members, C-level executives, as the county executive said over and over. And the other thing that was interesting, when we went through our planning last year, we had a special session with 250 what we called emerging leaders. It was people in their 20s and 30s at work at our members. And we asked all of our members to send one or two of them. 250 showed up, and we had a session. And they didn't tell us different things, but guess what the number one, unequivocal, number one priority was in their mind for regional development? Public transit, number one. Number two was infrastructure in the broad. And we talked about that at length. And I just think it's clear. It's a competitiveness issue. Regions are judged in large part based upon their infrastructure. It's a jobs issue. If you want to stimulate more job growth and put people to work that are unemployed or underemployed, these kinds of projects are, in my opinion, having done economic development for a while now, are one of the best, if not the best ways to do it. And it involves government. This is one of the core functions of government. Regardless of your political persuasion, your view of big or small government, infrastructure has to be the province of federal, state, and local government. And the issue that we as people of this country and of this region have got to come to grips with is, how do you pay for it? It isn't free. The private sector isn't going to build it with a profit motive. And there's no magical solution to this. It's got to be paid for. And as the Secretary said, we've got to pay for it for the next generation. And I had the pleasure of sitting on the Governor's Transportation Funding Commission last year. 40 of us made a unanimous set of recommendations that would generate $2.5 billion a year that would be indexed going forward to invest in roads, bridges, rail, air service, and public transit. And it looks like there's the beginnings of some action on that, which we're very pleased about. But we all, at the end of the day, the people that use the infrastructure need to be willing to pay for the infrastructure, and we've got to figure out how to get that message across. So, Bill.
With that, we'll move on to the Q&A. Hi, I'm Bill Flanagan with the Allegheny Conference. I got my boss here on the panel today. So
be nice.
We got extra good behavior. But I promise I won't hold back any softballs from Mr. Yablonsky. But the way it's going to work is you all got a little card in your folder. Please, if you've got a question or a comment, write it on the card. We've got a couple of folks in the audience making the rounds, and they'll get the cards and come forward. But I'll get things started while you all are jotting down cards. And I guess, Mr. Secretary, I'll start with you. Picking up on what Dennis just said, it takes money. So right now, we're watching Washington, you guys all driving pell-mell, full speed toward that fiscal cliff. Can we count on the feds for anything when we talk about the kind of infrastructure investment we need?
Well, I wish I had a bold prediction about the fiscal cliff. Anybody who says they know what is about to happen on it is kidding you. I will tell you, though, that this is a president and an administration that truly believes in infrastructure. As part of the negotiations, if you're paying close attention, the president has proposed $50 billion front-loaded in infrastructure investments, some of the critically needed projects around the country, all transportation modes that have been long delayed. He's doing that, and by the way, he has proposed that in previous budgets as well, but we have not gotten congressional approval for it. Because he knows that this really is a generational investment. There's a theme here, if we're paying attention. Just like education is an investment in the future, infrastructure of the mind, if you will, transportation is that physical investment that pays off and enables the kind of economic development that the county executive is out there working on every day.
Well, and $50 billion, so we understand the federal government is strained, but you look at the sheer size of this country, and the amount of infrastructure in this country, how far does $50 billion really go?
$50 billion, first of all, doesn't go as far as it used to, but it is a sizable down payment. What we have here, I mentioned we have a 2-year reauthorization bill, MAP 21. The reason it's only 2 years instead of 5 or 6 years, the way they typically are, that's because Congress could only find 2 years' worth of funding from the existing funding sources and existing funding levels. What MAP 21, this reauthorization bill, really means is it's a holding action while the discussion that you're talking about, which is about adequate revenue for needs today and tomorrow, takes place. The idea of the $50 billion is to get started on projects that are sitting there on the shelf while this discussion takes place.
To bring it home a little more, Dennis, you're on the Governor's Transportation Commission. What kind of need is there in Pennsylvania? Maybe Rich has some thoughts about here in Allegheny County in terms of the kind of investment we really need to be making if we want a 21st century transportation.
Well, it's a good question. I mean, the $2.5 billion that we recommended, which sounds like a lot of money, and it is a lot of money, all that basically does is maintain the current system. That's money for maintenance of existing roads, fixing the over 1,500 structurally deficient bridges that we have in the state. By the way, taking the wonderful work that the county executive and the governor did to avoid a 35% reduction in service in our public transit system this past summer, make that a long-term solution, not a one-year solution, which is what we got right now, and a few other things on ports and so forth. But to really make a dent and to start to do new projects and building more roads is not the solution for 100 million people, particularly in a place like Pittsburgh where nothing is flat. The beauty of our rivers and our hills make this a nightmare for transportation projects. We've got to figure out alternative means of doing it. And by the way, the estimate was at least $5 billion a year if you really wanted to invest on top of maintain in a new transportation system, just in Pennsylvania.
Rich, how about Allegheny County? What do we
I think
do?
Dennis says something that's very important. You talk about the transportation thing we were able to do earlier this summer, and we thought we were losing a corporate headquarters a couple of years ago when Bank of New York bought our Mellon Bank, that had started here many, many years ago. But since then, Mellon Bank has actually added a couple of thousand jobs on top of that. And the reason is because Pittsburgh is doing so well and it's so competitive. Now, to make sure that they're happy, I went to New York this summer and I visit them to make sure how are things in Pittsburgh. We want you to grow jobs here. I'm sitting under the picture of Alexander Hamilton, who started Bank of New York a couple of centuries ago. And the CEO of Mellon, BNY Mellon said, "Thank God you passed that transportation plan." And I'm thinking, wow, they're worried about this in New York. They were, because over 50% of the workers who work over at their service center over on Ross Street use transit to get there. They can't compete in New York for the talent and for the cost that they can here in Pittsburgh. So transportation was able to save those, well, actually about 5,000 jobs that they have over in that center. That's how important it is. There's another thing that's different. It's about the next generation. When my generation was coming out of college 30 years ago, the first thing most of us wanted to do was buy a car. Nowadays, young people, it's almost a badge of courage, badge of honor, if they don't buy a car. They want to be where the transit is working. They want to take a bike to work. They want to be on a trail and walk to work. It's a different mindset, and I think Dennis is right. We've got to find different ways of getting people around. It's not just the old spend it all on roads and bridges. We've got to look at imaginative ways to do that.
Sir, Dennis also mentioned the young people and how they put transit top. Do you see this across the country? Is there a generational split in how transportation is being viewed?
We absolutely do see this across the country, and where you see where the rankings of quality of life is highest, there's a strong correlation with an integrated transportation system that has hiker and biker trails, has excellent transit with good connections, that offers options. And every region of the country is competing for the best and the brightest. They're mobile, they can go anywhere they want. What we're seeing is transportation is a real asset to both attract and retain the kind of talent that you want, and it means every bit of the transportation system.
The question from the audience, this kind of has two faces to it, and it speaks to the challenge, I think, in part of generating investment in this type of infrastructure, this sort of public sector investment, maybe even attracting people to it. You talked about the need of people to get involved. And that is, this is an industry inherently, whether you're talking about transit or transportation infrastructure in general, that's tax supported. And nowadays there's a sentiment across the country, we don't want to be giving more money to the government, we want to invest in the private sector. So from the standpoint of generating revenue and getting the commitment of people to want to invest in transportation, how do you get over that hump? And then what do you say to parents who are saying to their kids, don't go working any of them government jobs, I want you working in the private sector, you don't want to go, don't go into transportation or those types of skills because you need a real job. Now, Secretary, I'll start with you, and maybe all three of you can take a shot at that.
Well, first of all, we need to show people that their hard-earned tax dollars are being used wisely in transportation. And it only takes one bridge to nowhere, one ridiculous project to sour people on this. It has escaped media attention in the last few years, but we used to have thousands of earmarked projects in the Department of Transportation. These are specific projects that a congressperson has designated. Some of them were terrible projects. We have 0 earmarks now, none. We have a merit-based selection process for everything we do. And for example, the Tiger Grants, Pittsburgh has done very well on the Tiger Grants because you have your act together and you're working together as a region. So, one, we have an absolute obligation to show that the dollars are being used wisely to show the return on investment, and we can show that from the transportation investments. The second thing I think that's important is, again, people have choices on where they can live and what they can do, and we see more and more that a balanced transportation system is an essential element of that. And that means whether you're using those hiker-biker trails or not, people want them and people use them. And we've seen bike share programs, pedestrian-friendly communities. We've seen a reestablishment of the linkage between land use planning and transportation, where walkable communities, these are the communities your grandparents probably lived in, mixed-use communities, people are flocking to them, and we're showing that transit investments, in particular in neighborhoods, they attract a lot of private capital.
I think the point about spending the money wisely is very good. And when he talked about the bridge to nowhere, it brought mind the tunnel to nowhere that was, as it was described, for about 15 years as we planned the subway extension over into the North Shore. It was used in political campaigns. It was used to bash anybody who supported that project until we opened it in March. You never hear the term tunnel to nowhere anymore because it's very successful. It's helped development. It's helped grow. And it was, again, a collaboration of business, labor coming together to work on a project with government at all levels. And we see how that has continued to spur development and really expand our downtown area, our Golden Triangle area. Now the question is, and it took 15 years for that to happen, from planning till it was open. Now where do we go from here? And we need to start that planning now. We're going out to the airport. We're going up into the North Hills. That's what we need to do. So we've got that. Now to your question about taxes and spending, I think we had an election a month ago in which one party said they were going to raise taxes on certain segment of people. I think for a couple of years we thought our president was a guy named Grover Norquist because he was in charge of anything we did. I think people realize that you can invest. You can raise taxes if there's going to be a return on investment. And I think you're seeing that now with these negotiations going on in Washington as more and more people who, quote, signed that pledge are rethinking that, maybe we do need to invest in the future, in jobs and infrastructure. So I don't necessarily think that raising a tax, whatever the tax may be, is the death knell that it has been in over the last number of years.
I mean, the business community is usually not the first entity to jump up and say we support tax increases or we support new revenue sort of fees. I mean, we're not usually the ones that do that. But on this issue, there is a statewide unanimity on this $2.5 billion. Our organization, our counterparts in Philadelphia, the state chamber, I could go on and on. This is an area where if you educate people and tell them the whole story, I think they get behind this. I mean, for example, the $2.5 billion will cost the average person who drives 10,000 miles a year $125 a year to make that happen. That's the cost. And is that a lot of money for some people? Absolutely. I don't mean to diminish it at all, but that's the kind of it. But it's not $1,000. It's a level of investment that whenever I've sat down and explained it to people, individuals or groups, they generally say as long as it goes towards good projects. And back to your point about earmarks and so forth, as long as it's going to merit-based projects, and I can see them in my hometown, I think we can convince the American public to make these investments.
Okay, that's the infrastructure piece. Related question from Pittsburghers for Public Transit. Where would the Leadership Coalition of Management deal with the issues of corporations, in this case, reducing tax breaks for corporations to generate investment in public mass transit? In other words, are corporations, is the business sector as prepared to invest in finding ways to shore up the transit system as they are in infrastructure? Yeah, I guess Dennis might want to answer that.
I think the answer is yes, and I think Dennis would probably agree, because it was one area in which people across the spectrum were supportive of saving transit. When we were staring at a 35% service cut to the Port Authority this fall, the coalition that came together from the business community, the labor community, everybody. I mean, it was community groups. It was from the richest CEO to the average worker, realizing that this could really hurt our economy. Not just me individually, not just my business individually, but as a whole. As we're growing and growing and growing, it was the one thing that could have hurt us. So I do see the willingness of big CEOs, of companies, of organizations and institutions to invest in transit. We were able to sell naming rights and advertising along our Port Authority. As again, people want to see, is it efficient? Is it going to work?
The other thing that ties into this is that part of what the Governor's Commission recommended is opening up Pennsylvania state transportation projects to public-private partnerships, which involve tolling in some cases. It involves joint development of transit systems. And a bill was passed last June that now allows this. It really was not functionally able to be done before this bill passed. And I think we're going to see interest in the private sector in being a part of the solution on some of these complicated new projects, but where there's an opportunity to make some money at it at the same time while you're investing in a transit or a transit system or a bridge or a road or whatever. So I think you're going to see more of that as part of both the state and the federal solutions.
And public-private partnerships are an important tool to have in the toolbox. We all realize that they can't cover every project, and they only work with a certain profile of projects. It's been very interesting to see regions and local jurisdictions around the country that have imposed local levies or assessments of some kind in return for example, specific transit projects. You show people exactly what they're getting, you show the return on investment, and you tell them what it's going to cost them. And in many cases, they've been very widely supported.
Back to transit for a second, so I got another question here, Rich. I guess this one is for you. Clearly, to do transit is going to take a local match no matter what happens at the state level. So since the drink tax funds are designated for the Port Authority, can they finally be fully collected to the legislated 10% to support the local match? If not, how are you going to deal with that issue?
Well, the local match is authorized by Harrisburg. Myself and County Council, we have two choices. We can either use property tax, or they authorized us a couple years ago, the drink tax, which could be maxed out at 10%. We have it at 7%, which matches our local sales tax in Allegheny County. I guess if pushed someday, we would have to take a look if we wanted to adjust it. But the way Pennsylvania has been set up traditionally has been more funding is collected, more revenue is collected at the state level. Very little is collected at the local level, so that's the way the funding formula has been. If there wants to be a change, I think it's a discussion we can all have. And if they want to allow us locally to collect more and put it into our local system, that's something we can look at. So I don't see a problem with having those discussions with our friends in Harrisburg.
One question back to the public-private partnership thing and some of these issues, and for the Secretary. One of the stumbling blocks the state hit a few years ago, one of the plans to deal with our transportation infrastructure issue was to toll I-80. Apparently the feds wouldn't let us do that. Are the feds going to let us do this kind of thing? Could we toll I-95 or I-80 and really solve Pennsylvania's problems with transportation infrastructure?
Well, for public-private partnerships, which we very much encourage, and again, there's some great examples around the country, one of the foundational principles is we want to see the revenues from that public-private partnership reinvested in those facilities. And if they're used to cover an operating deficit somewhere else, that's avoiding a larger problem. Without getting too much into the specifics of I-80, I think there were some fundamental issues with the way that was structured from our perspective. It does not mean that a public-private partnership can't work.
Yeah, if they had strictly proposed using the tolls for I-80 maintenance, you probably would have approved it.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Questions about the airport, which has not been mentioned too much to this point. As a consumer, the lack of direct flights, both domestic and international, with not much competition and higher fares are an issue. What are your plans there? Okay, jump ball, Rich and Dennis.
I guess Dennis and I and the transportation, Secretary LaHood, have certainly been trying to help us. And I guess to lay it out a little bit, our airport, our international airport, which is state of the art, one of the best in the world, is 20 years old now. And when it was built to specifications for one airline, U.S. Airways, as a hub. And at the time, it ran at about 65% capacity. One of the things that has changed, obviously 9/11, and then there was a bankruptcy with U.S. Airways, and the change in the way airlines operate is they want to have their hubs or their focus or their operations along the coasts. So they've gone out of places like Pittsburgh and Memphis and Cleveland. But the East Coast airlines, the New York Airlines, Newark, LaGuardia, JFK, Philadelphia, et cetera, are overcrowded. And they have delays that are interminable in some cases. So now there needs to be a major investment, billion-dollar and multi-billion-dollar investment in either expanding those airlines and then figuring out a way to pay for that. Is that going to be paid for by the taxpayer through the transportation department, or is it going to be paid for by the airlines, which many of them are in bankruptcy or in not the best of financial condition? We can make the argument, hey, Pittsburgh, here we are. Pretty good weather, pretty efficient operations. We can do all of these things, no delays. And by the way, you don't have to spend anything because we're only running at 15% capacity right now. We have excess capacity. All you have to do is flip a switch, and here we are, United, U.S. Air, American, Delta, et cetera. So that's the pitch we're trying to make. And plus our business community really is behind us, as Dennis has been very helpful.
We're working together every single day on this. And just to amplify a little bit what Rich said, did you ever wonder why the airport is so empty but the parking lots are so full? You ever wonder? I did. So I asked the folks at the airport authority. The interesting answer is we're the only major metro that's been de-hubbed and has seen, subsequent to that de-hubbing, an increase in originating traffic out of Pittsburgh. Okay? Nobody drives to Cleveland anymore. The prices come down when you're not a hub, so that incents people. My point is, we're just about maxing out local flying opportunities. I mean, we'll add more population, add more businesses, and they'll be incremental. And that's why you're seeing incremental improvement right now. Southwest adds a flight to Houston. They announced nonstop service to West Palm Beach. We end up with the Delta flight to Paris. Those are all positive steps, but they're incremental steps. What we need, the only long-term solution, is some form of a hub. We've got to get 50 or 100 flights more moved from the East Coast out here, as Rich described. And we've got a strategy we're working on with that, but it takes a while. The airlines, like transportation in general, they plan well out into the future. But all I can tell you is that there are a lot of really senior people from all portions of the regional economy working on this, trying to come up with a solution.
From a national perspective, my observation is you really do have your act together. You have a unified business community, which is really a precursor to holding on to the service you have and then increasing it. Clearly, more than just the origin and destination service is what you want. This working group that we've been participating in, we've been making direct appeals to airlines about it. This is like having train service 150 years ago. You need it for the region's future growth. It is increasingly difficult, I would say, as the industry continues to consolidate. And what you're seeing are a couple of things: consolidation of the major carriers, but also a dramatic drawdown of regional service. You don't see 50-seat regional jets much anymore, and the reason is nobody can fly them economically.
And is there anything the federal government can directly do to direct the airlines to better rationalize their system, or is
It's in a deregulated environment, which we've been in for almost 40 years now. We can't direct the airlines to do that. What we do is make very large investments, and what you see in the facilities in Pittsburgh, both on the land side and on the air side, are phenomenal facilities that can accommodate far more. We are not in the business of, and do not have the ability to tell airlines where to go. What we do, though, are partner with airports and regions who provide economic incentives for airlines, who make a business case. There are ways when airlines want to bring service in where we can speed up the process and make it easier for them to do that. That's what we focus on.
And one of the things, Bill, that we're able to do is, and as Dennis indicated, the fact that our O&D, our origination and destination traffic, continues to go up because of our growing economy, it puts us in a stronger position to negotiate and work with airlines to try to attract them. The other thing we have is we own 9,000 acres out and around that airport. From the economic development standpoint, a lot of companies have located there. We continue to grow jobs out there. And we also went out for RFP for drilling, for Marcellus Shale revenues. We're going to open those bids up in a couple of days, later this week. And we'll see if there's a package there with revenues that we're able to generate there. Is that something we can work with the airlines to try to lower the cost, to make it more efficient, to make it more effective? The other good thing is the airport's going to be paid off in about 5 years. So that debt level is going to come down to allow us to bring down the gate cost and the landing fees, et cetera. So as Dennis said, we're working on this every day. There's a strategy as we work through this. And as the airline industry works through their consolidation issues, we're poised to be able to capitalize and make that work.
Well, Dennis, one of the affiliate organizations of the Allegheny Conference is the Pittsburgh Regional Alliance, which is out there every day trying to convince companies to invest here and expand here. How big an issue is the airport when you try to sell the region?
Well, it's one of the issues. It fits into the category of infrastructure that companies look at. I mean, they're looking at the infrastructure, they're looking at the real estate and what they can get there, they're looking at the workforce, they look at the overall cost of operation. And so the airport does come up when we have these conversations, particularly if we're competing with the East or the West Coast. If we're competing with the heartland, our airport's competitive. If we're competing with the East or the West Coast, then we've got an issue that we've got to talk about.
Well, as the county executive said about the Brookings number, one of 3 regions to recover from the recession, we seem to be doing okay in terms of business investment despite some of these infrastructure issues.
We are. I mean, last year, 2011, there were 286 publicly announced company expansion projects in our 10-county region. That was 3rd in the country. 3rd.
Question, okay, we've talked a little bit about underuse of the airport, although clearly a lot of O&D traffic, as Dennis said. So this questioner wants to know, so what about the increase in congestion on the Parkway West? Cited by an internationally accepted company that named it as the most congested highway outside of 7 others in Los Angeles or New York. Why and what are we going to do about that?
That is, you know, as a guy that grew up on the East and lives in the East, I used to complain about the Squirrel Hill Tunnel until I had to go out to the airport, and those of us that live in the East have nothing on the folks in the West. They have the biggest delay in the world, and that is something we need to plan for long term. We probably need a 3rd lane and a 3rd hole in the tunnel coming down Green Tree Hill. It's because of all the growth that's going on in Robinson, in Findlay, in Moon, in Oakdale, in North Fayette. There's companies expanding there all the time, and that traffic jam doesn't just happen at rush hour. It happens all day long because there is so much growth going on out there. And again, it's one of those long-term, big number investments that's got to be made, but we've got to figure that out.
Now, a couple of questions about the Mon-Fayette Expressway, and Secretary Porcari, you not be aware, I've been around for 25, 30 years here in Pittsburgh, and when the Mon Valley and steel industry ran into its problems 30 years ago, one of the big plans was to build a superhighway right up along the Mon Valley, connecting Pittsburgh and I-70. It's partly built, but it's not been finished. And I guess the question is for Rich, for Dennis, for the Secretary, what are your thoughts? Does it need to get done? And if so, how's it going to happen?
This is an example of a project that's not a maintenance project. This is a large, multi-billion-dollar incremental investment that would be a fabulous project for the region. But in the current environment, I mean, even the state, I talked about the $2.5 billion, that doesn't even scratch the surface on doing a project like this. The only solution to these kinds of projects is a reauthorization, a long-term reauthorization of the surface transportation bill with some funding that would allow for these kinds of new projects. I mean, this is going to require federal money, and the federal money's got to come from somewhere once again. And there'll be a debate. The gas, you didn't mention this, but the gas tax, which is the traditional way of funding this, has become an increasingly larger problem because you all are driving much more efficient automobiles. And so you're spending less money on gasoline, and the tax in that fund keeps going down. And we probably have to talk about more creative ways, maybe road miles traveled or some creative way of funding this going forward. But it's going to that kind of a project requires substantial. Typically, 80% of that comes from the federal government.
I agree with Dennis. I just don't see the money. I mean, we're trying to get money to do maintenance and fix up what we have and maybe expand a little bit here and there. That multi-billion-dollar project, I think that's so far down the line. I'd love to see it built. I just don't see where it's going. And Dennis is right. We've got to rethink how we fund road and bridge projects. He talked about the mileage on the cars going up. That's one project, or that's one issue. What about natural gas vehicles as people start to go to that? We don't capture that money off of that. As natural gas, what, $1.70 a gallon versus what are you paying, $3.50, $3.60, $3.70 for oil-based gasoline, or if people go to hybrid vehicles with electric cars. How do we pay? How do we tax? How do we put a fee, whatever the word is, to be able to pay for the investment that we need?
Well, that's a good question. Do we have the revenue models that we're going to need in the future, given all these new energy resources and sort of the changing mix, efficiency, and everything else, to actually come up with all the money well beyond the $50 billion it's going to take to actually bring things up to speed?
First of all, the formula and the funding stream that was in place for the interstate system worked brilliantly for the first 45 years or so. It's, as you've heard, one of the good things happening in transportation, much better fuel mileage, leads to lower revenues. Clearly, something different has to be done. But I'd go back to the fact that it needs to be a two-step process. We have to make sure the public has confidence that these are good investments and show them exactly what the investments are. If you make the direct connection to projects, specific projects, typically it's a much easier discussion to have. As far as the actual completion of a multi-billion-dollar next phase of an expressway, there are a few places in the country where those kinds of projects are underway. I will tell you that they're few and far between, because the first question we ask is state of good repair. Are you maintaining what you have? And when your existing interstate system is pushing 30, 40, or 50 years old and you need to rehabilitate or replace the bridges on it, you're not likely to be able to fund new projects. The other observation is that cities throughout the country, many cities, have made the decision that they don't want to do that through their central business districts, that they want to have a different transportation mix there, and it's worked very well. You've had some cities like San Francisco that have even taken down their portion of the interstates in the cities.
A related question as far as the funding issue, Rich, and I guess this is for you. Same issue apply to completing the T to the airport?
Well, again, when we built the subway extension, which was about a $500 million project, it was the last 80-20 project that there was, meaning 80% of that money was paid by the federal government. The rest, 20, was paid locally. Actually, 17% from the state and only 3% locally. That's no longer the case. It's 50% is the max that the federal government is going to pay. So when we put the planning and go to the federal government to talk about our long-term planning to run the T, to run the subway out to the airport, how do we pay for it? That's going to be the central question. And actually, is that our number one priority? Or is more of a priority to link Oakland and downtown with a BRT, which is one of the projects, not light rail, but one of the projects we're working on now. So those are the conversations we all as a community need to have as to where we prioritize the big investment that we're going to have to make.
Dennis, you might want to talk about BRT. Let's use that term.
This is a good example of a somewhat manageable project that with a little creativity we can actually make happen. The objective is to create a predictable, fast, reliable transit connection between Oakland and downtown. And not that we don't have many of those things now with our bus route, but this is a little bit different with commercial development along the spine. We originally were thinking about this before Rich and I were involved with a light rail, which would be a great way to do it. But light rail for that kind of a project is $2 to $3 billion, and it's just beyond the scope of what anybody could fund right now. So what we did is we took a little trip to Cleveland. Cleveland has exactly the same kind of a project connecting their university area with downtown. It's a train-like experience on a vehicle that has wheels. I mean, it's a hybrid diesel-electric in Cleveland's case. They were able to cut, and I see Steve Bland in the audience, and correct me if I'm wrong with any of this, they were able to cut the amount of time it took by like 30%. They were able to increase their ridership by a similar amount, and the project cost approximately $200 million. That's manageable, and they've seen $4 billion of development along that BRT spine. That's the kind of thing we all work together. We can probably make that happen.
The Cleveland example, the Health Line, is a great example because it's a relatively low cost, was done relatively quickly. One of the exciting things going on in transit is the idea of value capture, where if you, whether it's bus rapid transit or light rail or any other means of transit, when you set those routes and stick to them, you bring in private investment. And being able to capture some of that increase in value for the transit systems, especially for operating costs, is, I think, one of the long-term solutions we need to work for.
And this is one that's perfect for a public-private partnership. We can have private entities be involved in some of the development along the spine and so forth. So this one could work.
And another good example, exactly what he's talking about, in the South Hills, at South Hills Village, the Port Authority owns a significant amount of land. And we were trying to develop that land and sell it and get investment in there. And we could never do it without putting an immense amount of taxpayer dollars into there. And we just weren't willing to do that. We didn't think that was right. Once we got the long-term deal with the Local 85 and the funding solution on saving that, and the extension of the North Shore Connector, the subway extending over there, it's increased those property values so much along that line, along that light rail, we were able to attract investment. So now there's going to be a $40 million private investment on that land. We are going to be paid, that the Port Authority is going to be paid a significant amount of money every single year, over a couple $100,000 a year in lease payments, and that property's going on the tax rolls again for the local community. So this is an example of where what the Secretary said, when there's fixed, predictable service along a route, it's going to add to the value. Google the same example along the busway out in East Liberty. The fact that we were able to attract Google there, one of the major companies in this country, because they wanted to get their workers there via transit.
A couple of questions about high-speed rail. About 20 years ago, I was a reporter at the time, covered a news conference about maglev. We're going to build a maglev train from the airport to downtown, eventually to Washington, D.C. It's been 20 years. That hasn't happened. Is there any hope in America for maglev? What about high-speed rail in general? And what, if anything, does it mean to a region like ours?
Well, first of all, I think you need to recognize there's kind of a crawl, walk, run strategy here. We're starting from a very low base where virtually the only passenger rail service is by Amtrak, and it's service that was inherited from railroads that just divested themselves of it, that didn't want to operate it anymore. So we've gone through about 30 years without any significant new service. One of the exciting series of projects that came out of the Recovery Act, the stimulus bill, was actually high-speed rail projects throughout the country where we're moving to higher speed rail and then true high-speed rail in places like California. So, for example, in the last 60 days, we opened a 110-mile-an-hour segment between St. Louis and Chicago. We're going to shave over an hour off of that time. It's important for Chicago. It's really important for St. Louis. We're doing the same Detroit-Chicago as part of a hub. What you'll see in the short term on high-speed rail are city pairs that make sense. Pittsburgh, I think, is very well positioned in that sense. When you have cities that are 3 or 4 or even 500 miles apart, they're ideally placed for passenger rail service. If you look at this, look at the region and look at the Midwest, This has great promise. It is expensive to repair and rebuild systems that have been neglected for a very long time. Most of the service is running on right-of-way that's owned by private freight railroads who, again, don't want to be in this business, and they move freight for a living. So there are some inherent frictions in that. Having said that, we've successfully concluded agreements with every single the Class 1 railroads, the major railroads in America, for new passenger rail service. What was funded through the Recovery Act is all we have at this point. We don't have another generation of follow-on projects. But I mentioned earlier 100 million more people. Whether you want to take passenger rail or not, you better hope we have it, because we're going to need it.
We're just about out of time, and so I'm going to begin to wrap things down. I'll let each of you maybe touch on this question. A couple of questions related to sustainability, green building, the environmental impact of all of this. So as you talk about expanding public transportation and infrastructure, is this being accounted for? How is it accounted for? And this questioner submits that this is really important to young people today and future generations. So how do we make this environmental impact issue and this environmental improvement aspect of it an important part of this conversation about the future part of transportation?
Well, first, within our transit projects, we have a separate category funding for environmental projects where it could be solar collectors on the roof of a bus maintenance facility. It could be green buildings that are used as transit hubs, and there are great examples of those around the country. In a relatively modest way, we are funding those projects right now. The other thing we're doing, both on the research and development side and for actual purchases, are encouraging the use of CNG and hybrid buses. Hybrid buses cost more, but the life cycle cost is lower. They're more economical. Brakes last longer, engine components last longer, and we are making, basically they're federal aid eligible, and we're doing that because we think that's the future, whether it's CNG or hybrid or some other technology. There are now all electric buses in limited use. All of those, transit already has a relatively small environmental footprint, and in terms of restoring air quality in cities, are one of the best tools that we have anywhere in the country. These programs, we think, take it to the next step.
Absolutely. We're all over the CNG buses. We think it's a great idea. We spend about $20 million a year on diesel fuel. If we were on natural gas, we'd probably spend about half of that. But as the Secretary indicated, to buy the bus, the capital upfront investment's a little bit more money. So that funding formula, which is kind of complicated, we've got to figure out. The second thing, and we haven't talked about this much, I mentioned earlier, was bikes. You know, we in Pittsburgh have a problem. We have a lot of people that want to use bikes, and we have narrow roads that the drivers, the vehicular drivers and the bicycles are fighting each other. We've actually had some very serious action and actually some fatalities with that. Maybe our fixed busway is a way in which we could have a dedicated bike lane. And I'll bet you even a biker would be glad to even pay a fee, a license fee, if they could have access to that dedicated bikeway without having to worry about getting run off the road by cars. Is that something we could take a look at? We've got our 3 fixed busways, East Busway, South Busway, and West Busway. Might be something to take a look at.
Last thing I'll comment on is, this is under the banner of smart transportation, I guess, but being an ex-tech guy, I'm always looking for technology to solve some of these problems. There's some interesting ideas coming out of Carnegie Mellon and other places that would improve signalization, red lights, better coordination and signalization. And the early analysis of this stuff is really amazing. They're talking about reduction in the amount of fuel used by as much as 30%. You want to talk about an environmental impact? If we could reduce the amount of fuel people use by 30% just by having more efficient signaling, I'm for that. So that's another area where I think we could make some progress.
Really exciting. A big challenge, a big price ticket, and I guess, Mr. Secretary, as you said in the beginning, we need talented people who want to take on this challenge.
These are great careers. They're I'm not sure anybody's born a transportation person. They're more made. And for those of us that have been lucky enough to work in the field, you can see the kind of career that you can build and that you can encourage young people to come into. You mentioned earlier public service, and having been in both the private sector and the public sector, they both have their pluses and minuses, but I can tell you, I can't think of a better way to give back and to leave this place a little bit better than I found it than through public service.
All right, how about a round of applause for our panelists? You gentlemen can stay seated for a moment. It's my pleasure to introduce our host for this series of events, Dr. Alex Johnson, the president of CCAC, for some closing remarks.
Secretary, good to work with you a little bit. You should be able to catch your flight.
Let's also extend a nice round of applause to Bill Flanagan. He always does such a great job of providing follow-up to the wonderful presentations that are being made. First of all, once again, Secretary Porcari, and to County Exec Rich Fitzgerald, and to our good friend Dennis Yablonsky, we want to thank you once again for being here this afternoon.